Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Government Finance Officers Association's training on Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities. Use collective decision-making. This webinar is approximately 2 hours in length and worth 2 continuing professional education credits based on a 50-minute hour. All participants' connections have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can submit them using the Q&A feature in the event management system. At the conclusion of the event, you will be redirected to a short survey to evaluate the content of today's presentation. CPE certificates will be sent to all paid participants in the mail in approximately 2 to 3 weeks. So, moving along, again, thank you for joining us today. Our presenters for today are myself. My name is Katie Ludwig. I am a senior manager here at GFOA. Then we will also have Mr. Brent Takeda. He's a budget officer at the City of Thousand Oaks, California. Then we'll have Megan McPherson, the Public Affairs and Communications Director for the City of Roseville, California, and Mr. Scott Pettingell, Budget Manager at the City of Roseville. And then finally, we will have Mr. Christian Sigmund, the City Manager for the City of Brookhaven, Georgia. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and give you guys a little bit of background on GFOA's new Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities initiative. So wanted to talk a little bit about why GFOA has developed this initiative, and really, it's a lot because we heard from our members about this. So GFOA's most recent member survey indicated that 7 of the top 10 member concerns related in some way to maintaining a strong financial foundation. So we heard that and did a lot of research. So over the last 2 to 3 years, we developed this framework to help our members address these concerns. This research, again, culminated in our Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities initiative, or as we like to also call it, the Financial Foundations Framework. So what's special about this framework? Why this framework? Why do we think this is something that works for members? Well, there's a couple different reasons, and I'll talk about those briefly. First, and probably the thing I like most about this, is that it really makes finance everyone's business. You know, we believe strongly that because everyone is involved in using financial resources within a community, so really everyone needs to be involved in solidifying them and should have a voice or a role in how those resources are divvied up. It also goes beyond the numbers. We all know that accounting records, finance records, those don't tell the whole story of a community. And also, I think, you know, we don't want to have a strong financial foundation just for the sake of having a strong financial foundation and just so that we have good numbers. We want to have a strong financial foundation so that ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a strong, thriving, sustainable community, a place where people want to live. So this really gets into that a little bit more. It's also based on accurate models of behavior. It's compatible with findings in the behavioral sciences. We're not going to talk about this too much today, but we have a book coming out in the next couple of months, and I really encourage you to check out that book once it's available for purchase, because it really does get into this in more detail and talks about how a lot of the research we've done and the case studies, these are all backed up by really behavioral science. And finally, it works. As I mentioned, the book has lots of case studies. Today you're going to hear from folks from cities who have done these things, cities and counties who have done what we're talking about, have strengthened their financial foundations by doing things that we talk about in the book and in this framework. So it's really demonstrated by real governments and experimental evidence. So again, we're very excited about this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the framework. I'm going to show you a slide in a second, but really the core of the framework is we have our 5 pillars, and underneath each of those 5 pillars we have 6 leadership strategies and 8, as we call them, institutional design principles. So the leadership strategies, as I think about what those are exactly, we're talking there about things that you as a leader can do within your organization or within your community to strengthen your organization's financial foundation. So that's really kind of, I think that's about like, what can you do? So as we say, like, you know, leaders can't order people to do things. They have to inspire pride, loyalty, enthusiasm to help people want to make the organization more financially sustainable. And then the design principles, those are really things that need to be put in place within your organization or within your community to help strengthen its financial foundation. So, or as we think about them, it's the rules of the game for how local governments and other organizations work together. And they really do provide a context for the leadership strategies. So here we are, without any further ado. This is the Financial Foundations Framework. Again, as you can see, we have these 5 interconnected pillars. I'll walk through those really quick. Pillar number 1 is establish a long-term vision. Pillar number 2 is building trust and open communication. Pillar 3, which is really what we're going to be focusing on today, is use collective decision-making. Pillar 4, creating clear rules, and pillar number 5, treat everyone fairly. As you can see, these aren't necessarily new ideas or particularly controversial or anything like that, but it's really kind of a different way for us to organize a lot of what we've talked about in the past as we talk about our financial policies and our best practices that GFOA has developed over the years. It's really kind of putting these together in a different way. It's very interconnected, as you can see. The pillars all work together. By strengthening one pillar, you're going to always be strengthening another one at the same time. And again, one can't be strong and the other weak. They really do need to work together. Again, we are focusing today specifically on pillar number 3, that collective decision making. So we really talk a lot about how we want to be developing forums for participation, and we talk about this both internally and externally. So we want different people from within the organization to be involved, but also outside of the organization, and that can mean lots of different things. One of the key leadership strategy here that we're talking about is engaging key stakeholders. So this is a team effort. You have to be proactive. You have to be responsive. Give people a voice. Let them voice their concerns, get their feedback, and then adjust as you need to. That's the leadership strategy that we're going to be talking about today. And then the 2 institutional design principles that fall under this pillar are collective choice arrangements. So that's giving citizens a seat at the table. So what can you put in place within your organization that helps people become involved? How do you engage them, right? So it's not only that you are engaging them, but then it's sort of the how you do that. And then the other thing we're going to talk a little bit about are what we have termed networked enterprises. So this is a way to share services across local governments to save costs. We really advocate here for building collaborative cross-sector networks to pool resources for addressing community challenges. We're going to hear about how all of these have been put in place. So Brent from City of Thousand Oaks is going to talk a lot about how they have engaged stakeholders and used different collective choice arrangements. In his city, they had an initiative called Your City, Your Priorities. So Brent's going to give us some background on that. And then Scott and Megan are going to also talk about engaging stakeholders and collective arrangements in a slightly different initiative they had in Roseville called Engage Roseville. And then towards the end, Christian is going to talk about not only engaging stakeholders, but really about that networked enterprise. He's going to talk about some experiences he had working on a collaborative coalition that addressed the opioid crisis when he was working in southern Ohio. The only other thing I wanted to mention here about our Pillar 3 is I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with GFOA's new Code of Ethics. If you haven't, I encourage you to check that out. There's information on our website. We've also recently There's been some information about that in our newsletter, so I encourage you to look at that. But really, there's sort of 5 sort of pillars, or that we don't call them pillars, but 5 really major tenets there of the Code of Ethics, and one of them is diversity and inclusion. And I really feel like using collective decision-making and the diversity and inclusion component of our new Code of Ethics really work well together and are very similar. Under that diversity and inclusion component in the Code of Ethics, we really we talk about how that providing people with opportunities to be part of the decisions that impact them is a key to having a strong ethical foundation within the organization. So that's very much in line with what we're talking about here. So it's just making the point again that all of this is related, and by strengthening, a lot of the times by strengthening your Code of Ethics within your organization, you're also then strengthening its financial foundations. So with that, I have a couple of questions for the participants. So our first question here is thinking about this and how important engagement is and collective decision-making. I want you to reflect for a second and kind of think about how well does your organization engage its key stakeholders, both internal and external, in its decision-making processes. So you've got 4 different choices here. First is that we do this very well for both internal and external stakeholders. It's meaningful and useful engagement. Second is we do an okay job with it, but it's kind of a chore for everybody who's involved. Third option is that we really don't do this, but we're working on it. We want to figure it out, and we want to see how we can do it better in the future. And the fourth one is that we really don't do this, and we have no interest in doing so. So I will give you all a minute or 2 to respond to that. Okay, let's see, I'm seeing it looks like the most responses we had were B, that we do an okay job with engagement, but it's a little bit of a chore. We had slightly a few more people also on C that we're not really doing it, but we're interested in it. And a few at the A, that saying that we do a really good job at this. And I am happy to say we had no one say that we don't do this and we have no interest in doing so. So I'm glad to hear that. And then let's move along. We have one more question before we move on. So question 2 is, has your organization in the past developed or is it currently developing a networked enterprise to address a pressing concern in the community? So again, as we talked about, a networked enterprise is sort of a collaborative coalition, broad-based, not just people within the government, but maybe there's community folks or nonprofit organizations, things like that. So has your organization developed or currently developing a networked enterprise? So our options here are, yes, we have a strong background in creating and facilitating this type of coalition. We've seen great success. B, yeah, we have something like this in place, but the results have been disappointing. C, we haven't done anything like this, but we would like to explore it further. And D, we have not done this, and I don't think it would work in our community. So again, I will give you all a minute or 2 to respond. Great. So we had a tie kind of between, it looks like, answer A and answer C. So an equal number of respondents said that, yes, we have a strong background, and no, that we don't, but we are interested in exploring it. So you are in the right place. And again, we had no one saying that they're not interested in this at all. So I'm glad to hear that. Again, if you're interested in learning more, you are in the right place. This webinar is going to give you some good information, I think, about how you might put something like this in place in the future. So at this point, I will hand it off to Mr. Brent Takeda, the Budget Officer at the City of Thousand Oaks.
So thank you very much, Katie. Hello, my name is Brent Takeda, and I'm the Budget Officer for the City of Thousand Oaks. And I'm here today to discuss the third pillar of the GFOA's financial foundations for thriving communities, which is the use of collective decision-making. And I hope to accomplish this by relating it to our city's community engagement process. I click on this. For those of you who aren't familiar with the City of Thousand Oaks, I'm going to talk a little bit about our city, and then I'm going to discuss our city's initial community engagement process, how it came about and how staff executed it, its strategy, goals, and what we did to obtain community participation, and then our results for the community engagement. For those of you who aren't familiar with the City of Thousand Oaks, our city is approximately 55 years old since incorporated. We're 40 miles northwest of Los Angeles and the second largest city in Ventura County. The median age for our population is 43, and we have a median household income of approximately $108,000, and our median home price is approximately $730,000. So I should mention that it's a fairly affluent community, and our residents expect a lot from our city and the services that we provide. And I should also mention that we're a contract city, so we contract out for both police and fire services with Ventura County. During any community engagement process, it's really important to know the demographics of your city, because this will help assist you in coming up with an effective plan on what might best work for you to reach out to your community. So we prepare a biennial budget, and our current budget for this fiscal year is approximately $214 million. Our general fund budget is currently about $87 million, and our CIP budget for fiscal year 2020 and 21 is approximately $94 million, and it's comprised of about 125 projects. So what led us to the community engagement process was that staff presented various challenges to our city council during our budget process. Staff mentioned that we'd have to do something to ensure our sustainability in various funds. So city council asked staff to prepare a fiscal sustainability study report, and basically we were going to present it at a later date. So what you're looking at right now is a slide that shows some of the challenges that we face, and we'd be facing this either currently or in the near future. Expenditures in various funds are projected to outpace revenues, and as an aging city, our infrastructure will require more attention and have to be repaired or replaced, which would cost money. Our public safety and pension costs continue to increase and will soon outpace some of our major revenue sources, which have been projected to be flat in the near future. Staff also work together to come up with various solutions on how best to address these challenges. So this is our community engagement timeline that we had, and staff presented the fiscal sustainability study to City Council and discussed the challenges the city was going to be facing, along with our various solutions that we had to address these challenges. And with that, City Council was really proactive, and they requested that staff perform some type of community engagement to inform our residents of the challenges that the city is facing or will be facing in the near future, and to obtain some feedback from them. So we started with our community engagement process, which concluded with our presentation of results at our City Council's goal-setting meeting. One of the most important things to do is to come up with a solid core team from various departments to assist with the engagement process. Prior to initiating the community engagement process, we formed a team comprised of both staff from our finance and our city manager's office. And we met to come up with an initial set of strategies and goals to complete it. You have to make sure that you have clear direction on what you want to achieve to make it a success. So ours were that we wanted to educate our residents about the fiscal sustainability study and the budget process, as well as collect community input on city services and our spending allocations. We then plan to use this information and inform City Council of where our residents' spending and budget priorities are. And with this information, along with the City Council's top 10 priorities, which they determine every year at their goal-setting meeting, staff would use this information during the upcoming budget process for allocations of funds. So this was our city's first major initiative using community engagement related to the budget, other than study sessions and public hearing meetings when we present the budgets to our City Council. So since this was our first attempt, our thought was that we would want to accumulate as much information as possible and basically just use as many tools as we could so that we could obtain results for future engagement processes in future years. So we just wanted to get our toolbox of information, see what worked and what didn't work when we were going and informing and engaging our residents. To this point, we decided to work with a consultant who does this type of engagement to, again, follow their lead and to obtain as much information as possible. The first thing we did as a team was we came up with a brand and logo. So as you can see on the bottom right corner, our brand and logo was Your City, Your Priorities, Thousand Oaks Budget. And we did this so that we would be consistent in everything we produced. So if you saw the brand and the logo, you knew that it was related to our community engagement process. We also work with setting up an online budget survey tool to obtain information and engage our residents. And again, what was really important, as I mentioned earlier, was that you have to build a solid team to be able to collaborate with and to assist you during this process, because it does take some time and effort, and all the teammates really added to this process. In our case, our team consisted of members from our finance department, our city manager's office, which included our communications and marketing staff, and also the city's television and cable staff, along with our assistance from our consultants. So we really wanted to inform our residents and then also engage them. So our strategy, again, was to try everything that we could think of and gather information on how effective and efficient each of the tools works within our city and with our residents. We informed residents by using our city's website, social media, our city newsletters, print and online advertising, and we even set up a public service announcement, or PSA, with the assistance of our television and cable staff to show residents how to use the online budget survey tool. This video was attached to social media post, and it was placed on our city's website, and basically it was a link to YouTube, so it was actually placed on YouTube. Once we informed our residents of the process, we wanted to engage them by having them visit our city's website, which had a dedicated community engagement webpage, as well as information on our finance and our department webpage. We wanted to direct our residents to our city's webpage, and more specifically to that community engagement landing page, to have them complete our online budget survey. And when we first started out, I want to mention that our reach goal was we wanted to engage at least 500 residents that would fill out our online budget survey. And we thought it was realistic, but we thought that would be a stretch based on our other surveys that the city had participated in. We also wanted to inform them of various pop-up events held during different times and locations throughout the city. Our goal was to engage residents as well as key stakeholders, and we felt that pop-ups would work the best to reach a wider demographic of residents. In the past, we've held scheduled meetings and always ended up with the same attendees, and we always noticed that they always had their same agendas, so we thought pop-ups would be more beneficial in this instance. And we found out that it promoted great two-way communications between residents and staff, where we could not only discuss the fiscal sustainability study of the budget, but we were also able to talk about current topics that were affecting the city at that time. So this is our city's webpage, and we also constructed a community engagement landing page, which was Your City, Your Priorities, and was reached by clicking on that logo. One of our goals was to direct residents to our webpage for them to complete the online budget survey, but we also wanted them to see what other budget and financial information was available to them. For example, if you can see, it's kind of small, but on the left side column, there are various information of the that finance puts out. One of them, I think it's the second one, says budget transparency. So they could explore a transparency page where a resident could click on a menu to obtain various financial information on the city's budget and actual revenues and expenditures. And our thought was that we kind of wanted to make our residents budget champions and just to let them know where information was related to the finances of the city and related to the city's budget and finances. So if somebody were to be discussing the budget, they might know the answer, or else they would know where they could actually find that answer. So that was another one of our goals. Basically, I've said it, that we've tried to use everything we possibly could, and that's pretty much what we did. We wanted to do everything that we could to reach out and inform our residents about our website, the study, and our online budget survey. So these are the various methods that we used. We wanted to build a complete toolbox that we can reference in future, that we could use, and we actually did use some for our current community engagement process, but we just wanted to build as much information as we could. So we tried everything that we could. We did scatter them out so that we could track how effective each one was by looking at our landing page and our online budget surveys analytics. So what we tried to do was basically correlate the number of visits to the media that we used for either that day or that week. So we didn't inundate our citizens with everything at one time. We spread things out, again, trying to look for what work was most efficient and effective for our community. And I think that was fairly important. There are ways that we could also reach out that were basically what we consider staff time friendly, meaning that we could post the information using posters and flyers, and staff wouldn't have to be at that given location or at a meeting, taking time away from work. You know, because we all know we're all busy, and these are just some ways that we can still inform our target audience of what we were doing and where we wanted them to be directed to. So we placed information cards and utility bills, posted information on social media, placed ads. Again, we did posters and flyers. And we also used our community network to assist us in performing our community engagement, like our Parks District, School District, and our various committees, as well as our Chamber of Commerce, to get the word out of what we were looking for in residents trying to complete our online budget survey by handing them out flyers, putting up posters in their different locations. And we even, I think I mentioned earlier, came up with a script for an ad that was run on our local college radio station. Actually, I'm going to talk about that in a bit. So now I just want to talk a little bit about these media outlets that we did use. These are the various social media tools that we use to inform residents, and basically inform them of the city's website and our online budget survey. And they were Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Nextdoor, and LinkedIn. So like most of your cities, if you go to your website, you'll see various social media links related to your city pages that have already been set up. What we were doing, we were just piggybacking on various social media connections that were already built with our residents through other engagement processes and communication and networks with them. And as you're aware, each type of social media can tell a different story. So if you wanted to tell a longer story, you'd use probably Facebook or YouTube. And if you could tell your story with one picture or a link, you can use something like Twitter or Instagram. You just have to make sure that you know what the message is that you want to tell your audiences. And within Facebook, if you see the picture on the bottom right, we even linked our YouTube PSA related to how to use the online budget software tool into our page. So the other good thing about social media is it provides instant feedback, so meaning that we could track the number of views or likes, replies, clicks, so we're able to see how effective each social media outlet was. Related to digital ads, we also wanted to complete our toolbox with various other tools that might work within our city. So we placed both digital and visual copy ads in our local newspapers and social media. And we had our community college, which is KCIU. We placed an ad on just so that we can try and inform residents in that media as well. So this slide just breaks down all the ads that we placed, the number of clicks that came about it. And so VC Star is Ventura County Star, and it just states that we placed 9,500 impressions, and out of that we had 19 clicks to our landing page of our community engagement site on our web page. And if you work your way down, the Acorn was one of our more effective outlets, and that's another local newspaper. And then we also did some print ads as well. As I said, one of the easier things in the community engagement process was just to inform our residents through posters and flyers. So we basically had about 600 flyers go out, 15 posters go out to different facilities and to our community partners. And then our city newsletter, which already has a population of residents and other parties, go out, which was helpful, and our city manager's office, our communications and marketing staff, would produce that on a monthly basis. So we had information going out about what we were doing and what we were trying to get across with our budget survey, and then our utility bill inserts. So we were doing all this to inform our residents about the community engagement project and our budget survey, but we also had to engage them. So we did our engagement semi-twofold. This is we did this with our online budget survey, and then also we set up some pop-ups at community events, which I'll get to. But this is just a screen print of our online budget survey. And what we were able to do is we were able to ask residents to balance the budget with sliders, as well as obtain various comments on specific service levels. So if you can see in the middle, there's a slider where they can increase, decrease, or maintain the current level of funding for, in this case, the library services. And at the top of the screen, you see a little red bar, and that when they increase the budget, their budget goes up, so they're going to have to cut their budget somewhere else or reduce budget for another service. So it was kind of letting them into our biennial budget process. So we were able to obtain that information from our residents on various services, asking them, if they would increase or decrease their services budgets, as long as they were always in balance. And as you can see, we asked them about 6 various areas, which were our police services, transit operations, our library services, open space, which is very important to our residents, and our senior and teen center. We were also able to ask our residents 4 open-ended questions, and they were related to our streets and roads, traffic congestion, cultural affairs, and economic development. And basically, we just asked them really short questions, but we wanted to know the answers to what strategies they might have to reduce traffic congestion, or what would they do to improve cultural affairs within the city. So we were really looking forward to finding out what their thoughts were. That was one area of engagement. Our second engagement process was our pop-up workshops. And for those of you who aren't aware, pop-ups are just that. Staff attends various city events or locations and sets up an area to meet and talk with residents. We use these events to meet and discuss the budget process, a sustainability study, and obtain results and information on which services were most important to our residents. And we did this with various games and informational posters. So pop-ups are a little more labor-intensive than the other avenues of social media postings and advertising, but we found out that our residents were really appreciative of staff being out in the community to not only talk about the budget, but we ended up listening to their other comments and concerns related to various topics going on within the city at that time. We also produced business cards that had information on the city's webpage and information that we were able to hand out to residents if they didn't have time to talk at that moment. And working with our consultant, we decided that pop-ups were the best options for this community engagement process because we were able to reach a broader scope of residents. So as you can see, we attended 4 community events throughout our city. We attended 1 farmers market, We actually set up a few tables at our local mall, which is the Oaks Mall. We collaborated with our police and fire chiefs for Coffee with the Chiefs, and then when we attended Arbor Earth Day. And out of the 4 pop-up events, we had about 1,100 total interactions with our residents. So just to go over real quick, we had various banners and posters, as you can see, and we had an exercise, if you look at the picture on the right, using green, yellow, and red pom-poms. And what we did was the canisters were all various services throughout the city. And if you look at the poster behind them, it actually describes each of the services that we had a canister for. And we asked them to place a green pom-pom if they wanted to increase the budget, a yellow pom-pom if they wanted to keep the budget the same, or a red pom-pom if they were willing to decrease the budget. And so if a resident were to place a green pom-pom in, let's say, cultural affairs, they'd have to place to increase their budget, they'd have to place a red pom-pom in another canister. And it was really interesting because that's one of the areas of this exercise that they felt most difficult, because it was hard for them to figure out what areas to cut. So we kind of put them in our shoes, and it was nice to see that we're not the only ones that go through this process every other year. And the pop-up events basically give residents the opportunity to voice their opinions and concerns, and it was a great way to start two-way communications, which we thought was really beneficial for this exercise. This is just a picture of our local mall, and we had 260 interactions. You can see on the right side we had the pom-pom type of exercise. On the left we had a spinner, and the spinner had various questions, or budget questions, and there was some information behind it on the poster about our budget. And again, we would ask them questions. Hopefully they can figure out what the answer was, but if not, it just started that two-way dialogue that we thought was really beneficial, and it got us to start to talk to our residents and see how they, or what they knew about our budget. So it was a lot of fun. We were also able to leverage a preset community meeting with our public safety staff, which was our fire and police chiefs. It just gave us another opportunity to meet with residents and inform them of the city's website, and the city survey that we were currently doing during our community engagement process. We had roughly 50 interactions, and this engagement, actually the police chiefs do this on a quarterly basis, and it's usually held at coffee shops, but what they did was they just brought in some coffee and talked to local residents, and if they had any questions, they were able to ask the chief. So it was a nice event to be a part of. One of the last events that we participated in was our Arbor Earth Day, and it was great because we were actually visited by a couple of the council members who were there, gave us their support, and they were also there to talk to the residents as well. So that was real nice. And that was not a long day, but I think it was from 8 to 3, and we had about 615 interactions with our community members, so that was a great turnout for us. So our web page, we had a landing page, and in summary, we had close to 4,300 visitors visit our website and go to our community engagement landing page. And we found out that the primary sources were Facebook, Nextdoor, and then Eggcorn, which is, again, our local newspaper. And when they actually went to our landing page, they spent on average about 5 minutes within the site. So we thought that was great. For our online budget software tool, again, we were able to ask our citizens 6 allocation questions and 4 open-ended questions. And we did have close to 1,300 visitors. I mentioned before that our goal was 500. We ended up with 606. So we thought it was a big success, and gave us a lot of information to talk to and have results to talk to with City Council. And on average, they were in the survey for about 9 minutes. And this just basically shows the pop-up workshop, the pom-pom game or process. And what we learned from this is that most residents wanted to increase open space, traffic congestion mitigation, and library spending. So as it relates to traffic congestion, staff followed up with residents at our most recent community engagement events, and we let them know that during the past couple years, we've invested money and time in adding several, and I don't know if your communities have these, but they're flashing yellow left-hand turn arrows. So we place them at busy intersections to hopefully decrease the wait times for those making that left-hand turn and alleviate some traffic congestion. So it's always good not only to hear your residents, but to follow up and let them know what came about from their input. Staff also collected results from the 6 allocation questions that we asked residents from our survey. And for this example, comments related to police services range from maintaining or increasing funding, like I think most communities, if you were to ask your residents, this is usually a topic for increasing their budget. And the biggest topic was to keep our community safe and prevent crime. So results that were collected for our 4 open-ended questions that were asked of our residents, the following comments were related to our streets and roads. And our residents wanted to maintain properly paved streets and came up with some suggestions on how they might be able to close the gap of actually paying for the street pavements or slurry seals. And again, one of the most important parts of this exercise is to make sure that you follow through. So again, during our current community engagement process, we informed the residents that we did hear them about this, and so what we tried to show them, or with that in mind, was that our community and staff heard them, and we undertook our city's largest street paving and slurry seal project in our history. So with grant and gas tax funding, and then our city council also authorized just over $10 million in general fund support, we were able to resurface approximately 50 miles of city streets and roads. So that was pretty impressive, and it was nice to actually let them know that we heard them, and we went ahead and funded a large project. So whatever you set out to do, just make sure that you follow up with your residents on prior results and of those actions that were taken. Hopefully, these are the results of our community engagement process. So we felt that our community wants to engage on the budget and the budget process, but we felt that we could do a little bit more with our younger and our newer residents. So we were trying to take a look at this prior community engagement process. Our residents also wanted to, like usual, maintain or increase police services and open space, and they wouldn't mind maintaining or decreasing transit libraries or our senior and teen center funding. So also they'd like to optimize traffic flow. We also added budget for an economic development master plan to provide more support for our local and our small businesses. So overall, you just want to make sure that staff maintains open and honest communications with your residents and to make sure that there's appropriate follow-up with the residents on the results of your engagement process. So just to conclude, just understand the message that you're trying to communicate and who your audience is, whether it's your residents, a sector of your community, or maybe even another jurisdiction. Understand what your strategy and goals are to make your outreach a success. Try to determine what the best method is for you to get your message across. And it could be scheduled meetings, it could be pop-ups. It's up to your message and your community and what works. Make sure that you form a diverse and strong team that brings various strengths and knowledge to the table, because it'll get the process done a lot more efficiently and effectively. And if possible, work with other members or groups in your community. Each can assist you in getting your message to their members, their partners, constituents, or their portion of the community that they serve. And most important, listen to your audience and always provide feedback. People like to know that they're heard. And with that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss our community engagement process. So thank you very much. And with that, there's a question 3, which is, what strategy do you think would be most helpful to your organization in terms of informing and engaging your stakeholders? So social media, greater online transparency, print media and flyers, radio ads, online budget tools, or pop-up workshops. So if you can take a little time and just go ahead and click on what strategies you think are most helpful to, or would be most helpful to your organization, that'd be great. And I will try and turn this over to Megan. Katie, is there anything else? Ooh. Hopefully, Katie, I turned it over to you.
Are we ready to go on to Engage Roseville?
I think so.
Great. Well, thanks, Brent. That was a fantastic presentation and a lot of similarities with our approach too. So, really enjoyed it. So we're going to talk about Engage Roseville. I'm Megan McPherson, the Public Affairs and Communications Director for the City of Roseville, California, and I have Scott Pettingill with me, who's going to talk about this process from the finance perspective. And a little bit about where we are. We're near the capital of California, Sacramento, and we've gotten a lot of questions about how we were structured to do this. Our communications team has a central department in the city manager's office, and then we work with communications folks in all of these departments. Some of them have full-time staff, some of them don't, but we have contacts so that we can gather the information that we need. So we're a hub and spoke model in terms of our communications infrastructure. So we had a question for our community and a problem that without a new source of revenue, our city was looking at a $14 million annual shortfall to the general fund for operational and long-term expenses and significant reductions in city services. We had to tell the story that we had been reducing our expenses for 10 years leading up to this, starting during the Great Recession. And we were doing it in ways that were not noticeable to our community. So a lot had to do with the cost of labor, other material and supplies, as well as training. But now we were at a point where this was going to get much more significant for our community. So our goals were to educate our community, increase awareness, give them a baseline of information, and then gather input, so much like Brent talked about. With that, we wanted to provide data and analysis that would inform the City Council's decisions. And with that also, we wanted to increase public confidence in government. So that goes along with the Pillar 2 of trust and open communication, building that. And we really did see that result from this effort. We'll talk about that a little later in our presentation. Our guiding principles for this included engaging everyone. So we didn't want anybody in our community to be able to say, nobody asked me, and I never had a chance to participate, whether they lived here or whether they were visiting here or whether they worked here or owned a business here. So we wanted to provide an opportunity, whether they had a lot of time, a little time, could attend a meeting, could only do electronics, never used email. We had options for everyone. We wanted to educate and really provide that awareness of how different municipal finance is from our own personal budgets and the kinds of challenges we were up against with grant funding, with specific streams of revenue, fees that are earmarked towards things. So it's not like our personal budgets where we just shift money around between accounts. We have such specific rules around how we can spend our money. We wanted to simplify these complex concepts for people so that we wouldn't bore them and so that they would actually be willing to listen. We did a lot of that with graphics such as this and doing less words, more pictures. And then we wanted to listen to their input, and we wanted to reflect back to them that we heard what their input was, and which was a huge part of this, because it's one thing to get the input. It's another thing to actually let people know we heard you, have them see what the results are of polls that they're taking, present this to council, and we actually kind of marketed some of the stuff we did, and we'll talk about that too. We wanted to, in our key messages, and I do think it's important to touch on content here because how we position this was really key to building trust. We wanted our community to understand this is a problem all California's cities are facing. So we weren't unique because the initial reaction people have is fiscal mismanagement. There's something wrong. Why don't you have money in a booming economy? So we've been trying to address this for a while. We weren't unique in facing these issues. We wanted to talk about the fact that some of the issues we were facing are much broader. They're societal. They're nothing we can control. So changes in consumer spending habits reduce our revenue. Things like purchasing goods and services purchasing goods online, the shift from buying goods to buying services, because in California services are not taxed, but goods are. So if you buy a lawnmower, we get the revenue. If you hire a lawn service, we don't. And people are shifting generationally to more service purchases. We still have an impact from the Great Recession that we're trying to catch up from. That yes, we have already tightened our belt. We were getting feedback saying, have you done your own homework? Have you kind of cleaned your house before you're asking us to do anything? So we made a big point to talk about what we were doing to cut costs. We did not shy away from the pension issue, and it looks like the City of Thousand Oaks did not either. It's a part of the problem, but it's not the only problem. It's not the only reason that we're talking about budget issues. We also wanted to make it very clear to our community that as we got feedback saying, well, just cut pensions, that'll solve it, that we actually legally cannot cut pensions in California at this time. So it's something that we're obligated to pay, and it would get paid before we would be paying for some of the services. So we needed to figure out a holistic approach to this issue. We also were explaining that that the city gets a small fraction of the tax revenue. So people thought the 7.25% sales tax statewide, which is a statewide minimum, that all went to the city, or all their property taxes go to the city. So you'll see a little later what we did to help educate them on the small fraction we get. And then we really wanted them to tell us what matters to them. We, much like Thousand Oaks, put many years into this before getting to the final point. So we were starting to talk in this green area about what the issues were, that we were actually seeing problems on the horizon with our city council. Our city is known for having we have a very successful auto mall. We have a very successful Galleria mall, and so the impression is that Roseville doesn't have any problems. So the fact that we were even talking about having problems was a big deal, and we had to lay the groundwork for a couple of years before that. At our City Council budget workshop, or goal priority workshop, they asked staff to do outreach as we looked at more significant cuts that the public would be feeling. So we started this program called Engage Roseville. That started 10 years ago when we would do community engagement. 15 years ago, it typically started with a committee. Well, we talked about we need to do much more than just a council-appointed committee in order to get widespread, broad-based community buy-in, which is very integral to the pillars that Katie went over at the beginning of this. So we'll talk about some of the other efforts we used. As I said earlier, we wanted to engage everyone, no obstacle for anyone to participate. We wanted to make it very accessible. We went on to provide a report. We were informing the council and the community of all the results of these efforts the entire time. But it ultimately also culminated in thousands of data points to report to the City Council in April of 2018. Part of that was that the community wanted to increase revenues, is what we heard. So the City Council gave the community that option and put a tax measure on the ballot, the first ever in our very conservative city, and it was successful. It was a half-cent sales tax measure called Measure B. We'll talk about that a little more as well. So this is kind of a graphical representation of the approach we took. Education is on the bottom, the different tactics we used, from podcasts to short little videos that kind of teased what was going to be discussed at the Community Priorities Advisory Committee, which we broadcast live on YouTube. Transparency was very important to us, and we used our social media, website, meeting with community groups. And then the engagement portion, like Brent went over, they did as well. And so these were all the different areas we used. The Community Priority Advisory Committee, which was 20 volunteers from the community appointed by council. And we had our 5 major general fund departments do presentations and then prioritize services from each. So two meetings a month over an 8-month period, so it was quite a significant time commitment. For people who didn't have as much time, we did flash vote, which allowed people to give us input on service priorities within 2 minutes is what it's supposed to take on their phones. 48 hours later, the poll closes, and everyone gets to see the raw data from it. It's pushed out. So as far as transparency was concerned, that built a lot of trust. Community conversation, we sent out a direct mail piece with educational information and invited everyone in the whole community to come to a community conversation. And we'll talk about that. So that was an in-person facilitated meeting, and people could vote on their phones about their priority and see the results instantly. We used a service called Balancing Act, which was very fantastic for people who wanted to sit in the seat of our city manager. We created a $2 million deficit and allocated our funding for our major general fund departments. And from that, people had to, before they could submit their report to us or what they came up with for their priorities, they had to balance the budget, closing that $2 million deficit. So we had one of the highest participation rates of any city that Balancing Act has worked with in the country. And this came at the end of our effort that we offered Balancing Act. So our premise is that we had done so much education and outreach that people were really ready to spend the time, and we had almost 400 people participating in that. It takes about 40 minutes. So that was successful. And then we offered phone and email for people who just wanted to tell us what they thought. So our website was engageroseville.com. We bought a unique URL for this, and all of the information, videos, podcasts, results, everything was and is on this website if you want to look at that. As a defensive measure, you always have to make sure you're ready for the naysayers and the cynics. So we also bought Enrage Roseville. So that was our in case anyone wanted to oppose us, we went ahead and bought this URL, and we directed it back to Engage Roseville. We had the Community Priorities Advisory Committee. This was the one that met twice a month for 8 months with each department, Fire, Police, Parks, Recreation, and Libraries, Development Services, and Public Works presenting each month over that time frame, raising awareness and getting priorities. And from that, before we went on to have each of those meetings, our staff sat down with the department directors and interviewed them so they could provide a short synopsis of what the issues were, how they were funded, and what some of the problems on the horizon are and what some of the big projects on the horizon are. So at least people, if they didn't have time to watch the meeting or attend it, they could get a flavor of each area of our general fund that we were focusing on. And as we taped these on video, we also took the sound and did podcasts, edited it for podcasts that are on SoundCloud. We did a direct mail piece to all the homes in our community, all 60,000 of our residences. We have 140,000 population, but 60,000 residences. And we talked about how do city services get paid. One of the points was that 60% of our sales tax revenue comes from shoppers and businesses, so people who don't visiting shoppers and businesses, so people outside the city who aren't residents, and that residents are kind of subsidized, so they contribute 40% of the sales tax revenue. We talked about from the sales tax a resident pays, the city receives just 14%, so it was a little less than a penny, and then of the 7.25%, and then property taxes, the city receives 15% of the property taxes. So we were trying to debunk the myth that the city had plenty and plenty of money because people pay taxes, and trying to give some insight into how that gets allocated. We also talked about what we've done to control costs, and at the bottom is a graphical representation of what I talked about at the beginning. Some consumer trends that are affecting and really holding down the revenue that we used to get. So the switch to online shopping and the switch from goods to services, which are not taxed in California. We also used Flash Vote, and so this was a very effective tool for us. We talked about what the priorities were, and we were able to look at it demographically, by geography, by age, and by gender, I believe, were the three areas. We had a good base to start from because our Placer County, the county that our city is located in, had already begun using flash vote. So when our city decided to use flash vote, we already had over 1,000 people who were signed up in Roseville. So we got to just build on that base. And this gives us a statistically valid, very easy representation of what's going on, with the results shared immediately with all the people who participate. And we used Balancing Act at the end of this. So this is where we closed a $2 million deficit. And throughout Balancing Act, we were able to talk about what the impact is, not only what was being cut if you were to click on the different the 5 departments here, or I think we have 6 here. We separated libraries out. So you could click on those. You could see the spending line items. You could increase or decrease the spending there, but you could also click on icons to let you know what the consequence is of that. And then you did have to close the deficit before you could submit what your feedback was. We had a community conversation, and this was we had 100 people come from our community, and we set it up with roundtables. We didn't want any one person or voice to dominate the conversation. We wanted it to be a discussion within the community. We had a facilitator come from our Institute for Local Government. One of the benefits of being near the state capitol is that we have resources like that close by. And we had one staff member at every table. We had kind of facilitating the discussion and taking notes. We had roving subject matter experts. If we were talking about fire, we had some of those staff members so questions could get answered. And then people voted live, and they could see those. This is a broader view of that room, but they voted on their phones, and we used a program called Meeting Sift where their answers could be shared right away. We had the police chief speak and then a vote on those services, the fire chief a vote on those services, Parks, Recreation, Libraries vote on those services. And this was from this, we actually interviewed participants, and we created, which is on our website if you'd like to see it, a video and a podcast that talked about it. So it was very important to us that we market back, if you will, to our residents what we had done. Because if you couldn't come to this or you weren't interested, it still happened, and it was still a very influential event. And we wanted people to know that even if you weren't there, couldn't participate, we are doing this outreach. So you have every opportunity to come, and please let us know what you think. So from that, the report was compiled from all of these different outreach areas and into a report to City Council last spring. And the council did decide to put the measure on the ballot, and we went to Election Day. So this was a different phase of this community engagement effort because it involved an active measure being that was going to be going on the ballot. So staff really was very, very conscientious of maintaining a strict informational posture with the information we were providing. We had a section of the website with /Measure B, and we had Q&A that we were getting from social media and from our in-person conversations, and also some key points about the measure. We sent out an informational piece. This was a double-sided direct mail piece to all the homes in our community. We wanted people to know facts if they hadn't been involved the last 18 months about this effort. We wanted them to know some key facts. We did a video. The images at the bottom of this are from the video where we gave a quick overview of the issue and what we faced. That's also on our website. We also invited people to 2 more open house sessions, and we had staff from all the departments ready to answer questions. So it was kind of the last opportunity. If you wanted to know what was going on, please feel free to ask us. This is this was probably all the people that came to those sessions. We didn't have a whole lot of takers, and we actually consider that a success, that people felt like their questions maybe had been answered. We'd offered all kinds of ways to interact with us, and we always appreciated the opportunity to answer questions face-to-face. We did this is me talking at a community group. We are wood-paneled Lions Club. And the woman there isn't actually bored. She's actually looking at one of the pieces that we handed out. And people really appreciated the one-on-one conversations to talk about it. So that's some of the building trust effort that really paid off. Some of the challenges that we faced were early on convincing leadership of the need for broader outreach, that we needed to do more than just form a committee and receive their recommendations. This needed to be very broad-based and widespread. We also needed to simplify messages. As you all know, municipal finance is very complex. And then the public perception of what is the city doing? Is the city running out of money? Are they being managed well? So we had to face that and try to mitigate that with the education we were doing. Once we put it on the ballot, this Darn Lawyers really talks about how do we not cross the line into advocating. And we always worked closely with our city attorney staff on that, and I would recommend anybody does that who is looking at, especially if they're working on something that goes towards a ballot, you work very closely with your attorneys. And then we also really debated how much is too much. I saw Brent had a certain number of times that they posted on different social media channels and such, and that is what we were looking at as well. We didn't want to flood people's Facebook feeds with our information about this and make them angry that, okay, we've heard enough, kind of wear out our welcome. So we were very thoughtful and strategic in our timing of how much we talked about this in the places where people gathered virtually and in person. So we have an outcome. Part of our outcomes are we have a very involved community. We still have people asking about many of the aspects of this. Now we're operationalizing Engage Roseville and keep referring to that as we move forward in our budget. We have tens of thousands of data points on which to base decisions and get information. The measure did pass with 62% of the vote. It needed 50% plus 1, and it was about 8 points higher than what earlier polling had suggested it would be. So we were very happy about that with how much engagement had been done probably in the time since in between those two events. A lot of people are applying for boards and commissions. People are very interested in public service. We also, as part of Measure B, have a Citizens Local Sales Tax Oversight Committee. So we're continuing this outreach and feeding back to people that we heard them and how their funds are being spent on increasing police officers, library hours, things like that. So that's part of how Engage Roseville is continuing. And from that, I'm going to hand it over to our budget manager, Scott Pettengill.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. Next, I want to take an opportunity to briefly touch upon 3 takeaways that our finance team found to be important to contributing to the overall success of the Engage Roseville effort. None of these takeaways were surprises or new concepts, but as we worked on this project, we quickly realized that placing a priority on these concepts was very important. The first takeaway was the importance of establishing a cross-organizational team to oversee the Engage Roseville effort. We made sure to involve the right people from the very beginning. The team was oversaw by a project that brought together people with various skills and experience to provide different perspectives on the project. The team representatives were from across the organization, including the city manager's office, finance staff, the executive team, and representatives from our operational departments. One aspect of this team that especially contributed to the overall success was the involvement of our communications team, headed up by Megan. I would highly recommend involving your communications team when coordinating projects such as this. They were very critical to the success of the project overall. To ensure that the effort stayed on schedule and on message, we ensured continuous communication by scheduling recurring meetings for the project team. These meetings helped ensure that everyone had a clear sense of direction. They also encouraged ownership by asking members of the team to agree on key objectives and messaging. By taking this approach, it secured and shared agreement on the direction in the program and also helped contribute to the commitment and supported collaboration. The second key takeaway was to focus on simplifying complex financial information, and this was for the benefit of both community members and also city staff. Being in finance, we're often faced with explaining complex information to people that are unfamiliar with the topic, so I always find it tempting to be a subject matter expert and share all the information I know, but I always try to keep in mind that overloading the audience with information can be counterproductive and oftentimes create more confusion. We tried to strike that balance between keeping the message simple, but obviously not too simple. Throughout Engage Roseville, we worked with our cross-organizational team to refine our message based on the audience that was receiving the information. And examples of questions we were consistently asking ourselves were, who are we talking to? How does this topic impact their daily lives? What do they already know about the subject already? And what gaps did we need to fill in along the way? Overall, we strove to ensure that the message we conveyed was laser-focused on the audience's needs and experiences. As a group, we also challenged each other to avoid using jargon whenever possible. We worked together to find alternative ways to explain information in a way that was user-friendly and easy to understand. By not using jargon, it helped us build trust, and I think it made the people feel like we were more on the same team and had their best interests in mind. We also placed an emphasis on working with our communications team to develop ways we could use images and words instead of numbers, as well as using metaphors and analogies to help take rather complex ideas and make it easier to digest. This helped ensure that our messaging provided people a point of reference by allowing them to draw on something familiar to make sense of something unfamiliar. For example, the mailers that Megan spoke about earlier were high in graphics and low on text and numbers. One of the mailers that she pointed out included a couple graphics on how new customer spending habits have impacted city revenue streams. One graphic in particular used a kind of a then and now comparison to simply convey the financial impact of shopping at a store versus shopping online. Another example was the use of simple pared down pie charts. Rather than having charts that have many different slices of data, we work with them to pare down the information into simple and easy to understand categories. We also strove to make sure everyone involved in the Engage Roseville effort used consistent metrics and messaging. This focus helped us strengthen trust and confidence when we worked with the community throughout the entirety of the process. For example, if all of our mailers and presentations included different messaging and data, it had the downside of not helping people understand why this effort was so important. And by focusing on consistent messaging, it helped us be on the same page and also strengthen community engagement. Finally, we had a lot of success in strengthening community trust and collaboration by incorporating the feedback we received from the Engage Roseville process into our budget documents and presentations. One example was the creation of the new budget and brief document. This slimmed-down version of the full budget document highlighted the community priorities identified through the Engage Roseville process and showed how those priorities were used as a guide when developing the budget. The document was distributed to all city staff, community groups, and we made it available to all public counters. In addition, the document outlined the ways in which community members can participate in the annual budget process. The document also incorporated other key takeaways from simplifying complex financial information, as you can see in some of the graphics we included in the image on the slide above. Overall, this new document was well received by our City Council, and it's something we plan on continuing in the future. The last point I wanted to highlight was that when the City Council considered the budget for adoption, we incorporated an overview of the Engage Roseville effort into the City Manager's budget presentation. And it detailed how the priorities identified through the Engage Roseville effort helped guide the list of services maintained, restored, and added through the annual budget process. So this concludes a list of key takeaways and our presentation overall. Just want to thank everybody for this opportunity to speak to you about Engage Roseville and how it relates to collective decision making. I think next we will move on to a poll question number 4. The question is, for your organization, what do you think is the most significant barrier to developing a community engagement initiative similar to Engage Roseville? A, time. Staff don't have enough time to develop a strategy like this. B, money. We don't have funding for an ad campaign or to implement an online tool. C, political will. Leadership is not interested in community engagement. D, all of the above. Or E, none of the above. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Katie now.
Thank you very much. Next, we are going to have Christian Sigmund from the city of Brookhaven, Georgia. Really quick, it looked like the poll results showed that the main thing was time. The biggest, that most people thought the most significant barrier to developing a community engagement initiative similar to what Roseville implemented was time. There seemed to be about 38% of participants thought that time was the most significant barrier. Not surprising. I know we all have a lot to do. So we will hand it over to Christian Sigmund. Megan or Scott, can you hand control over to Christian? By doing that, you have a little dot next to your name. Can you kind of use your mouse to put that onto Christian's? Perfect. Somebody did that. Okay, Christian, you now have control of the presentation, so thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Let me get back to where I'm at. I'm a first-time user of this, so hoping it's going well right now. I want to thank GFOA for inviting me to this presentation today. Mine is uniquely different from the other two cities, which were top-notch efforts to engage the community on a very strategic issue, which is obviously financing. But I'll talk about a slightly different approach today. A little bit about my background. I've been around a few different organizations, but I came up through the financial world, specifically budgeting. And the most important thing by providing this background here is this includes city and county governments, small cities and very big cities, as well as Midwest versus East Coast organizations. So specifically, GFOA wanted to describe my experience related to developing forums for participation, but not necessarily from an enterprise level like you just heard. Just a recap of the pillars and the strategies that were introduced early in the presentation from the GFOA's framework. You have a strategy of engaging key stakeholders, which is extremely important because those are the folks that are your future leaders. Those are the ones that your elected officials listen to. Those are the folks that are paying the most attention to what's going on in the community. And then there you have your two design principles, which are your collective choice arrangements. And you have some very good examples today from Roseville and Thousand Oaks, and then networked enterprises. And that's what I'm going to focus on today is network enterprises. So anytime I'm given a new assignment, and I viewed this as an assignment, I wanted to look up the definition of participation and what a forum is. And you heard two good examples today, and those were enterprise level issues as it relates to financial sustainability of a city or a county. But a forum can also address other things that are enterprise like comprehensive planning, but also very issue-specific things. And each forum will be defined by the issue that's presented in front of you. Into the definition again. Participation, this is actually from Webster. Why I highlighted these topics here is you're taking part and you're participating, and then it's a shared responsibility. And obviously in the two examples you heard earlier, paying additional taxes is a shared responsibility, but lending your voice to a solution, whether you're a taxpayer or an actual leader of an organization that can make an impact, that's part of your responsibility when you participate. You've heard two examples today of community participation in the budget process, but every community in the United States has some kind of comprehensive plan, and they're typically defined by your state or your region or your metropolitan planning organization on how you're going to have a vision for your community. You may have to update them every 5 years, every 10 years, but your organization at the end of the day probably has a comprehensive plan and typically geared around land use. I'm giving you a link here today, sir, for some very good information how to structure public input and community engagement for land use. And you'll find if you go to that website or visit the documents off GFO related to San Bernardino County, it looks very similar to financial management and community input on the budget process. Sorry, I got far ahead here. I'm going to go back. Like I said, this is my first one. Bear with me for a moment, please. Thank you. Okay, back to budgeting. So you heard two good examples of budgeting for public input on the process. GFOA has some very good examples out there that are available for communities across the United States to engage. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about engagement versus input, and the engagement is being part of your management processes, not just for enterprise issues, but really about everything that you do in your organization and local government. This chart here is very common if you do any research on community engagement in any really sector of work, social services, municipal government management, higher education. This chart will show up as a continuum of how you reach the community and work an issue. 20, 30 years ago, most folks operated in the outreach and the consult area, and now we're seeing organizations such as Roseville and Thousand Oaks operating in the areas of involve and collaborate. But many issues, you really want people to participate, have a shared responsibility, and you have to push further to the right in this continuum for their level of engagement, especially if you're asking them to make a sacrifice in finances and time. A very good example that you'll see coming out of this exact series on the financial framework is out of the city of Hampton, Virginia. I believe it was presented in Pillar 1 or Pillar 2. But I also want to briefly talk about one that's been around for a long time, also in Virginia in Arlington County, and this is the Arlington County Way. I hope you can read this graphic on this chart about how and when they engage the community on issues. The Arlington Way is a management process on everything that they do, from enterprise level things like land use and budget to a particular capital project. They sit down and consciously decide what their engagement process will be. That county, I believe, has at least 3 or 4 employees that all they do is communications, or not communication strategies, engagement strategies as issues, helping departments, helping the council, helping the county manager, in forming a engagement process that has the best result. The 2 links that I've provided there, the top one is actually a document from 20 years ago. They've been doing this a long, long time. And then the bottom link is their latest tools and tips and how they go about doing community engagement in that organization. As I've said before, participation is not always community-wide. The issue we're going to talk about today is a community-wide issue, but the participation to work the issue was not as broad and enterprise level as you heard in the two previous presentations. In our particular case, we're going to be talking about a public health crisis. When we get into these types of exercises, and you've seen it in your organization, you're going to have to rely on a networked enterprise strategy that will not only include other department heads and sister governments, but also other sectors and maybe even other levels of government. The issue that I want to describe how we used a networked enterprise in was opioid addiction in Hamilton County, Ohio. Just a little bit about Hamilton County, Ohio. Hamilton County, Ohio is the county where Cincinnati is, and the metropolitan area covers southwest Ohio, southeast Indiana, and northern Kentucky. So it's a three-state region of about 2.2 million people, with Hamilton County being about 800,000. So we were by far the biggest local government in the region, but the issue we were dealing with spanned 3 states and 9 counties. To tackle this issue, I was the county administrator at the time. The position is appointed. It's not an elected position. I needed to tee this issue up and work it because it was not on the community's radar. They were seeing the headlines of the overdoses. They were hearing about tragedies in the jail of people coming in addicted and dying in the withdrawal. And it was a horrible situation, but no one was putting all the dots together saying, is this something that's a public health issue? Is this something we need to address? Is this an issue that we tackle like crack cocaine in the 80s, or HIV, or other public health issues or specific public safety issues? I didn't see anybody across the region or even the nation at that time making this a public policy issue that needed to be addressed at the executive level, at the policy level, and not really at the community level at that time. To help tee this up, I borrowed the concepts and, quite frankly, took the concepts of the Kettering Foundation Deliberative Democracy Exchange. And the 5 bullets you have there can apply to an enterprise solution, as you saw in the 2 previous presentations, or it can be issue-specific like we're going to talk about today. The key to a networked enterprise is everyone on the team together. So in the case of the 2 previous presentations, the team was made up of the chief executive, department heads, communications, maybe a trusted council member or an engaged council member or other type of individuals. But in this case, I needed a team of folks that had a shared vision, who knew this was recognized it as a problem. We trusted each other. We didn't take a lot of each other's time, had a lot of backdoor communications, and we make decisions very, very quickly. So following through those bullets, naming the issue, in many cases, opioid epidemic was a term that was relatively new to the issue. Heroin overdoses, heroin scourge, those were terms that were being thrown around. I give you these Google searches. This is as of 2 weeks ago. Opioid addiction is nowhere near what Me Too is getting, but opioid epidemic was something that even today does not have the reach that it had before, but I think everyone in the community knows they have a problem with opioid addiction, overdoses, and all the consequences that come out of that. It's no longer hidden. It's something that folks are actually talking about. So to frame the issue, in many cases, initially it starts out as a law enforcement issue, and that's what crack cocaine was in the late 80s. But this issue quickly evolved into framing it into 4 concepts or 4 areas or 4 pillars that we needed to look at as a team of multiple state agencies, county agencies, city agencies, and departments, and those were in the areas of treatment, and that would be treatment ranging from the voluntary treatment to the compelled, to treatment that are in various government services where people find themselves, whether it's the jail or foster care or even in other benefit categories. Prevention, all the way from, this is your brain on drugs, all the way through seniors that a lot of people don't realize become addicted to painkillers. Reducing the harm. These were programs that were evolving to essentially how do we reduce the impact and the consequence of the frequency of overdoses, and supply reduction, which was law enforcement collaboration. With supply reduction, that was a purposeful term not to basically trying to mute the focus on law enforcement that was easily what everybody wanted to gravitate to. So who was part of this network? This network, these 6 bullet points here, not all of them worked for the county government. The social service providers were some county agencies. There were nonprofit and for-profit entities in there. The public and safety officials spanned 3 states, cities, counties, police, and fire. The public health leaders involved public health officials across 3 states. We had a health policy foundation that helped underwrite some of the early work. We had hospital systems across 3 states, and we even brought in the faith leaders because in many cases, the consequences of opioid addiction end up in our churches and our community. You can tell a lot about an organizational's commitment to an issue by the level and the caliber of the persons representing the organization. That would be true on an enterprise effort that you heard earlier today of the types of persons and department heads and folks who may or may not have a shared vision or commitment or sense of urgency that this is something we need to focus on as a community where the community may go beyond the corporate boundaries of your city or county. As this team came together, it was done very quietly. We didn't do press releases or announcements of meetings. The meetings were technically open to the public, but we didn't do invites. There were a lot of behind the scenes of working together of what we could do immediately to bring structure to the issue, what resources could we dedicate towards it that didn't bust our budgets, taking a long view that ultimately we were going to have to go back to the policy bodies and the public probably for some more funding on this issue, but we needed to frame the issue, start working the issue, try some pilots, and in the decision-making process, in many cases, we ended our meetings with, if I hear no objections, this is the way we're going, and we would get these pilots and these programs and these policies working, and then evaluate them and then report back. Key on this is leaders were busy. Very, very busy, and they had lots on their plates. All those 6 different types of organizations involved in this effort, they all have day jobs, and their mission was very specific to them, but they knew success in making progress on the opioid epidemic would help their organization as well and have a greater outcome for the community. As far as identifying resources, the long play on this was ultimately would be a city or county-wide enterprise effort, as you heard in the 2 previous presentations, but the immediate work was behind the scenes, talking about it in long term, of how would we structure a long-term ask, being cognizant of on-ramps, what are budget schedules, not only for your local jurisdiction, but the state and federal government, for grant programs, getting appropriations, those types of things. Start small, have a pilot, test it out before you go to scale, and appeal to everyone on the shared sacrifice. Once everybody was on board of what the vision and the urgency was, it was not hard for them to provide some of their budget, but obviously we weren't going to impact their main mission in these early stages. As far as actions, many of our actions had to be organizationally relevant across all of the jurisdictions. And to do that, we had consistent communication. I could do a whole different presentation on the consistent communications over the branding for this effort. I'll let you Google that on your own time. If you Google Inject Hope, which was an award-winning branding exercise for what we were doing, we engaged a private sector branding company to help us with that. And that one effort helped bring 3 states together, not only at the political level, but also at the individual level. Team reporting out our results to everybody across those sectors, across the 3 states, coordinating that communication. Being ready for the call up to the big league. I put that in there because we got so successful, and because we were a large metropolitan area, we started getting calls from the governor, and we got a call from the U.S. Senator, Senator Portman, on what we were doing, and they were asking how they could help us. So that brings me to the last bullet on this slide is you needed to be prepared to go to scale. Was our quick action response teams, could they go countywide in 90 days if I gave you $10 million? Those types of questions we started to get at the state and federal level. So we had to be ready to go to scale, and it's something we didn't think we would get that much traction that fast. After the initial success of getting this teed up for the community, framing the issues, getting the right people at the table, which started with just 8 individuals. These were the leader of the public health department, the leader of the hospital system, a police chief, the police chief representing the Regional Chiefs Association. It has expanded now to 11 steering committee members and 40-plus member organizations, all rowing together, all communicating, all using the same branding and logo to move the issue forward. In summary, the forums for participation are limited and always evolving, from structured community-wide efforts to focused networked enterprises. Collective decision-making does not always involve elected officials initially, but obviously if you're going for large appropriations or major budget changes or tax increases, they're going to be brought in, and then you would move into a more traditional public engagement process that you were exposed to earlier in the session today. All of the issues that we're talking about, whether it be a public health issue or ensuring the financial sustainability of your city or county, are really wicked hard issues to resolve. And ultimately, we'll get into larger issues that will require you to think about your neighboring jurisdictions, your relationship with the state, and federal policy, such as criminal justice reform, public education. And had I made this presentation a week ago, I would have included immigration in that as well. Cautions when you do an approach like this to frame and work an issue without a large enterprise or community input. You really need to know your standing in the influence and the authority. And that's just not you as the chief executive of the county, but also the people that you're inviting to the table. Does that public health director have the chops to work this issue and bring their organizational resources and talent to bear on it? You have to be willing to make mistakes. We made a mistake in pushing out needle exchanges faster than the community was willing to accept it based on the political makeup of the community. We had to backtrack on that, but now it's full steam ahead. And then some issues are just not ripe for addressing. That's something you have to work through, recognizing that most of the folks on this session here are finance directors or accounting managers, or at least focused on the financial part of running a city or a county. But because you have a fiduciary responsibility of leading your organization, protecting it financially, there are some issues that will put your organization at risk, like opioid addiction, that you must lead. that concludes my presentation. I want to note that I have moved on. I was with Hamilton County for 10 years. I've been in Brookhaven, Georgia now for 3 years, and I've been presenting on our collaborative approach and multi-jurisdictional approach for opioid addiction around the country for the past couple of years. I want to thank the GFOA for inviting me to this session today, and I'll move on to the last question. What pressing issue is your community facing that could benefit from a networked enterprise? I won't read them all out, but the other might be immigration or even more focused things on governance and civil discourse. But I don't know if you get to add what the other might be, but I would definitely look forward to everybody's responses. Thank you very much. Back to you, Katie.
Hi, we have question 6. Sorry for that delay. But this question says, what do you think is the most significant barrier to developing a networked enterprise in your community? So we have 5 options here: lack of organizations, lack of a shared strategic vision, lack of interest, lack of trust, or other. So if you would take a few seconds and respond to this. Okay, it looked like the most popular response here was about 29% of folks were saying lack of a shared strategic vision amongst various partners. Definitely can see how that can be an issue sometimes, you know, competing priorities and things like that within a community amongst various organizations. So definitely something that needs to be overcome, and I think sometimes what can overcome that lack of a shared strategic vision is the sort of emergency nature of whatever issue is being faced. I think there in Hamilton County, the fact that the opioid crisis was growing and growing and was really reaching, again, crisis mode, emergency mode, really kind of got everyone on the same page. In closing, again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd like to thank the presenters, Brent from the City of Thousand Oaks, Scott and Megan with the City of Roseville, and again, Christian Sigmund with the City of Brookhaven and talking about his experience there in Hamilton County. Very helpful to us today, much appreciated. I also wanted to give everyone a little bit of a heads up. We have some, if this Financial Foundations initiative is interesting to you and you want to learn more, we do have upcoming webinars. We have one on September 19th to talk about creating clear rules. Clear rules help us reinforce constructive behavior amongst everyone, so that's very important. On October 10th, we have a webinar on treating people fairly. We're going to talk a lot about how that promotes mutual trust and respect, and again, is the core of this initiative of ours. And then on October 24th, we're going to be talking about financial foundations and really putting it all together. So kind of talking about how all the pillars come together and how you can use those to strengthen your organization's financial foundation. Again, I just want to mention we do have our book, Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities, coming out in the next couple months. Be on the lookout for that. That will be available for order through the GFOA website. And then if anyone has any questions or comments, want to learn more about Financial Foundations, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Katie Ludwig, or my colleague, Shane Kavanaugh here at GFOA. Thanks very much.